Well, let me first just start by welcoming everyone to our latest Cultures of the Future series. This is actually a special series in partnership with Zer0 Books. Zer0 Utopia is a book series published by Zer0 Books, which is an imprint of Collective Inc. And their latest book is a primer on utopian philosophy by our guest, Jon Greenaway. Culture of the Future is an initiative by CETAPS, which is conceived as an online forum to discuss key issues for the advancement of the humanities and the study of culture at large. And we have already hosted a few talks and conversations, all of which are on YouTube. So first of all, or second of all, rather, thank you so much, Jon, for being here. So Jon, for those of you who don't know him, so he is an independent academic and author. He has taught at universities across the UK on the intersections of horror, theology, Marxism. He is the co-editor of Horror and Religion, a book from 2019. He's the author of Theology, Horror, and Fiction from 2021. And this year is not only the author of a primer on utopian philosophy on Ernst Bloch, but he also has another book coming out, right, on horror called Capitalism, a Horror Story. And his work has appeared in The Guardian, New York Times, a bunch of different outlets. And he also co-hosts a podcast, Horror Vanguard, on horror film theory and left politics. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk, Jon. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for being here, and go ahead, take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for being here. I really appreciate any interest in the work of the philosopher and writer Ernst Bloch. Firstly, thank you so much to Manuel. Thank you so much to the entire organizing team for this series of talks, and to everyone at Zer0 Books as well for putting together the Utopia series. This talk is more of a kind of provocation and a chance to articulate the necessity of a return to the grand utopian philosophical project of Ernst Bloch. But to do so, to make that argument, I want to start with a poem, something of a thesis statement for myself over the last year or so of writing this short book on Ernst Bloch. The poem is by one of Bloch's close friends, fellow communist, the playwright and political writer Bertolt Brecht. The poem is called To Posterity. Indeed, I live in dark times. A guileless word is an absurdity. A smooth forehead betokens a hard heart. He who laughs has not yet heard the terrible tidings. What an age it is when to speak of trees is almost a crime, for it is a kind of silence about injustice. And he who walks calmly across the street, is he not out of reach of his friends in trouble? It is true, I earn my living, but believe me, it is only an accident. Nothing that I do entitles me to eat my fill. By chance, I was spared. If my luck leaves me, I am lost. They tell me, eat and drink, be glad you have it. But how can I eat and drink when my food is snatched from the hungry and my glass of water belongs to the thirsty? And yet, I eat and drink. I would gladly be wise. The old books tell us what wisdom is. Avoid the strife of the world. Live out your little time, fearing no one, using no violence, returning good for evil. Not fulfillment of desire, but forgetfulness passes for wisdom. I can do none of this. Indeed, I live in dark times. To talk of trees today is a crime. To talk of utopia, of the no place that does not exist, is by doing so to remain silent about the very real dystopias that leave so many of our friends and family and comrades dead around the world today. Truly, we can say, along with Brecht, I live in dark times. In darkness, it is hard to think of anything beyond. In the dark, light can seem like a bad joke. To use another analogy, we find ourselves in the hell of capitalism and surrounded by the ruins of utopia. Utopia is not yet a paradoxical necessity that cannot be in this world, and yet this very impossibility is the ground of its being. Utopia is about this process of venturing beyond. To think is to transgress, said Bloch, utilizing the idea with reference to his great dramatic influence, Goethe's Faust. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. This phrase, attributed to Frederick Jameson, Slavoj Žižek, and most famously and enduringly to the British cultural theorist Mark Fisher, has become something of a shibboleth in the Anglophone left post-2008 and the slow unfolding of necrotic capitalism's many crises. The last decade or so has seen a resurgence of popular, accessible, and rigorous criticisms of capitalism, but utopianism or utopian philosophy is in short supply. There are, it has to be said, multiple reasons for this. The ever-escalating scale of the problems we face, economic, ecological, environmental, and biopolitical, the extent to which positive political projects have, in the mainstream at least, been either exhausted or co-opted, and the ways in which contemporary political institutions seem systematically designed to snuff out agency and militate against the possibilities of any quantitative or qualitative shift in political and social totality. The earth is on fire, and the structures of democracy are sclerotic, decayed, and in the hands of reactionaries who are more than happy to watch the bodies pile up in the foundations of our so-called civilization. In an era such as this, it is not hard to see talk of utopia as a bad joke, either crushingly naive at best or unforgivably quietistic at worst. And yet, Ernst Bloch's work stands as both an invitation and a challenge that if it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, we must work on our imaginations. If the end of capitalism is the end of this world, then so be it. How to describe the work of Ernst Bloch? His philosophy was written over the course of more than 50 years, and he stands with one foot in the 19th century, the other in the 20th century, as the philosopher par excellence of hope. Frederick Jameson, in the 1974 book Marxism and Form, refers to him as the theologian of the revolution. Bloch credited with doing the same thing that Aquinas, doing the same thing for Marxism that Aquinas and medieval scholasticism did for theology. In postmodernism, the cultural logic of late capitalism, Jameson says this: one finds everywhere today something like an unacknowledged party of utopia, an underground party whose numbers are difficult to determine, whose program remains unannounced and perhaps even unformulated, whose existence is unknown to the citizenry at large and to the authorities, but whose members seem to recognize each other by means of secret Masonic signals. In the lead up to writing this book, I've met people who've told me they know nothing about Bloch or have never heard of him, but there have always been some, not many, but some, who have responded with delight, members of that underground party committed to the unannounced and unformulated program of which Bloch's philosophy is one of the great heralds. Jameson's introduction, which is one of, if not the very first major English language introduction, compares Bloch's philosophy to a great satellite, something which has crashed into the earth from some other time and some other place. Bloch is a philosopher of the future tense, creating concepts for a world which does not yet exist. Do we need him? Some will ask. Did we not have enough of the great utopian projects in the charnel houses of the 20th century? Do we really want to try and reckon with the immaterial when the world we have is more than enough to try and deal with? These questions, and many like them, posit a kind of necessary hard-headed realism, a grim-faced honesty about how the world is. And yet, I think that forsaking the utopian arsenal of thought leaves any political project two choices: either a quiet collapse into reformism, managed decline, and acquiescence to just how things are, or, and perhaps worse, a withdrawing from the question of the future at all. Neither, I think, are particularly appealing or acceptable answers. After all, as China Miebel points out, we already live in utopia. It just isn't ours. To put this another way, think of Rosa Luxemburg's famous challenge written over a century ago. Bourgeois society stands at the crossroads. On the one hand, socialism, the other, barbarism. This was decades ago, decades past. And in many ways, the crossroads is very far back in the distance. But to my mind, this only raises the stakes that the world can still be less bad, that the world can still be changed. For a lot of people, I think hope in our present situation is best understood as a subjective, fleeting moment. It can be found on picket lines, in protests, in the mutual caring for one another that is the very concrete stuff of solidarity. But what to do when those moments fade? If we are to think about a mode of life and being outside of the oppressive structures of capitalist realism, then those brief moments, what Bloch in his own words would call Vorschein, or the pre-appearance, are just not enough. What we need is a means of philosophizing, and Bloch presents us with an opportunity. His work seeks to ground hope in something more than just those fleeting moments of subjective feeling, but to do so requires a radical rethinking of what it means to do philosophy full stop, and thus politics. For Bloch, our hard-headed realism is all too often a cover for our own inability to reckon with what we can do. As he puts it, as long as the universe is not completely closed off, then no objection to utopia can be raised on purely factual grounds. This isn't to say that Bloch is some obfuscating mystic, but rather he insists that existence is simply not some sort of given, that the facts of a political situation are never fixed as some natural and immutable law of the universe. To put this another way, Bloch insists that we look both at and through the facts in front of us. Understanding just how bad things are is the necessary first step for reckoning with changing anything and everything. This, I should point out, is also entirely in keeping with Bloch's broader philosophical approach to the questions of the philosophy of history. Try as it might, capitalism has not absorbed all of history into itself, and the past for Bloch and his fellow philosopher Walter Benjamin is a rich source of catalysts for change. Thus, the task of a utopian approach to history is not to clarify what really happened way back when, but to destabilize and denaturalize what we think history even is. So, in trying to think about the relative lack of popular interest in Bloch, for some, perhaps the problem is one of style. Bloch's loquacious, modernist prose, his insistence upon writing about the high aspects of culture, his interest in religion and theology might make us just a little suspicious. In the wake of Mark Fisher's work, which has shaped an entire generation of writers, there is perhaps a tendency to valorize what I term the necessary negativity of critique. In this environment, it's easy to see that the great passages of Bloch music, as Adorno would put it, are dangerously close to a kind of religious enthusiasm, looking past the present problems for an easy utopian dream. And there are two kind of problems with that. Firstly, I don't think that's fair to the philosophical content of Bloch's work, and maybe we can get into that in due course. But I think this also misses the utopianism of thinkers like Fischer. Mark Fisher is often caricatured as a miserablist, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. His famous phrase, "No more miserable Monday mornings." The thing that was so transformative about reading capitalist realism is the insistence that this world, for all of its nightmarish qualities, was something constructed and both should and could be changed. Philosophical negativity is not simple miserableism, it is a stand against the present. And thus, even if it's never stated explicitly, it is a call for a radically different future. Take the famous maxim from Theodor Adorno, "Wrong life cannot be lived rightly," is not just an aphorism of critique of the present, but it's also a demand for a life that can be lived rightly. The end of capitalist realism is a call for an understanding of the present that recognizes the audacity of our demand and the extent of our capacities. To put this in Blochian terms, from the darkness of our lived moment, we do not yet remember of what we are capable. Thus, a primer on utopian philosophy is an attempt to show the ways in which Bloch's historical situation and his intellectual work still have much to teach us, and it is entirely compatible with a philosophical commitment to the ruthless criticism of all that exists. The great utopian Tom Moylan, in his book Becoming Utopian, talks of the dialectical and dialogic movement of denunciation and enunciation that makes up utopian philosophy. For all of Bloch's reputation, and he might be dismissed as simple enunciations of a world which is not yet, his work is the very model of exactly that double movement, philosophy that is done in and against the world of capitalism. This is one of the best reasons to try and read Bloch if you never have, as a philosopher whose work directly speaks into the blockages and contradictions of the present. Another kind of facet of this that I think is worth bringing up is in The Principle of Hope, Bloch writes about the cold and warm streams Marxism of the dialectical tensions between the stern calculations of political economy on the one hand and the prophetic call for genuine human freedom on the other. These are not contradictions, but necessary and interdependent approaches to the issue of emancipation. One without the other leads inevitably to disaster. The cold stream without the prophetic call into a liberating future wanders off into the mists of revisionism and compromise. The warm stream without the sobering influence of dialectical materialism loses itself in violent revenge against the world. Both are needed, and we have been sorely lacking the fire and futurity of Bloch's prophetic warm stream of Marxism. The translators of the English edition of The Principle of Hope, Neville Place, Stephen Place, and Paul Knight, point out in their introduction that it is a profoundly literary work, which explains why Marxists didn't really like it. Bloch is both a poet and a philosopher, and his work is never abstract or overly scholastic. Rather, he believes that the utopian impulse has been found within philosophy, but cannot be isolated to just that field. To quote from the opening of The Principle of Hope, which I think puts this really rather beautifully, "The good new is never that completely new. It acts far beyond the daydreams by which life is pervaded and of which the figurative arts are full. All freedom movements are guided by utopian aspirations, and all Christians know them after their own fashion too, with sleeping conscience or with consternation from the Exodus and messianic parts of the Bible. In addition, the merging of have and have not, constituted by longing and hope and by the drive to reach home again, has in any case been burrowing in great philosophy, not only in Plato's Eros, but also in the far-reaching Aristotelian concept of matter as that of possibility towards essence, and in Leibniz's concept of tendency. Hope acts unmediatedly in the Kantian postulates of moral consciousness. It acts in a world-based mediated way in Hegel's historical dialectic. However, despite all of these Enlightenment patrols and expeditions into utopian terrain, there is something broken off about all of them, broken off by contemplation. Utopia is glimpsed and explored by philosophers and theologians, but what is the fulfillment of these expeditions? This is done in Marxism, not an abstract scholastic exercise, but the philosophy of praxis, that which is lived and fought for and struggled over by the laboring, organized, militant mass. This all sounds so grand now, and perhaps this is the true problem we face in returning to Bloch's philosophy. He was attempting to ground hope. For us, the challenge, I think, is to hope for hope, or rather, to make utopia thinkable again. The last decade has seen a huge upsurge of radical movements around the globe, but has also seen a generation of defeat. Bloch writes extensively about the Doctor Spes, the educated hope, and if defeat is educational, then we have had that in quite some measure. From his 1961 lecture, Can Hope Be Disappointed? He puts it like this in the conclusion. The world process has not yet been won anywhere, but also it has not been thwarted anywhere. And human beings can be on earth the indicators of the decisive way towards salvation that has not yet come, or towards damnation that has also not yet come. The world remains in its entirety the same highly laboring laboratory for the possible solution. Hercules said, whoever does not hope for the unhoped for will not find it. The value of Bloch is not in some naive optimism, some forsaking of the world for an absent heaven, or a commitment to a particular party, program, or state which is supposed to usher in utopia. Utopia is, after all, no place, but is, in Bloch's philosophy, the unfolding of a process that works across the very fabric of existence, leaving indelible traces within history and of all human culture. There is a dream of a better life that remains unextinguished, a historical trace still present in the ruins of the capitalist nightmare that point out somewhere beyond to the new. The original title for Bloch's magnum opus was going to be Dreams of a Better Life. And to talk of dreams now is not a crime, to return to Brecht, but to insist upon the very possibility of a world in which those dreams are realized. We must be utopian. Bloch talks of Marxism as both detective and liberator, able to look at the world in all the stark, bloody facts of it, and still see the possibilities and unrealized lingering potentials of a world that could be otherwise, the specter of a world that would be free. Or, to quote the famous line from Mark Fisher, emblazoned on the walls of his old university, emancipatory politics must always destroy the appearance of a natural order, must reveal what is presented as necessary and inevitable to be a mere contingency, just as it must make what was previously deemed to be impossible seem attainable. Bloch opens his first major work, The Spirit of Utopia, like this. I am, we are. That is enough. Now we have to begin. Or, as Mark Fisher closes the very final line of his famous book, Capitalist Realism, from a situation in which nothing is possible, suddenly anything is possible again. Thank you very much. Let's stop there.
Thank you, Jon. It's such very inspiring words to close, and it's such an important book. I think it's so important to recover it in a degree, or to remind us of Bloch's work. So thank you for doing that in your book and in your talk right now. So actually, reading your book, I learned that Bloch had actually wrote about fascism, which I didn't know before. I might have a question for you about what a utopia and Bloch or hope can do. in our moment, during the rise of fascism. To this idea of what hope, reading Bloch and Utopia can do for us now, especially in this during this time of the rise of fascism. So in Portugal, we just elected, I believe, almost 20% of parliament. It's a neo-fascist party that just gained a lot of momentum recently. And so what do you think, John, that Utopia, Bloch, Hope can do for us in this age of catastrophe?
I think the reason that I'm trying to in this talk, I'm trying to kind of bring together, this kind of Fisher-esque kind of negativity with Bloch's utopianism is best expressed in a line from that essay by China Miéville that I quoted. And Miéville says, "We must learn to hope with teeth," which I think is in the context of Bloch, I think is really important. So Bloch was with the hindsight of 2020, we can say that maybe one of the big flaws in Ernst Bloch is that he is in some ways deeply Leninist. He's committed to the party form and is committed to a kind of mass line struggle of political, of class war, right? So he is not averse to the question of political struggle. Like, hope is not an abstract thing. Hope is fought for. And often that's like horrifyingly literal. So in the context of this question, one of Bloch's best book is in English called Heritage of Our Time, Erbschaft dieser Zeit. And it was written as essentially a sociological study of Weimar era Germany and of the rise of fascism. So the contemporary angle on fascism taken by too much of the left in Bloch's day was fascism is it's mistaken ideology, right? People are they're just believing the wrong things. And if you tell them the right things, they're going to believe it. And Bloch says, actually, no, you've completely misunderstood how fascism operates. He memorably describes German fascism as a swindle of liberation, right? And he breaks down to like a kind of minute level the ways in which fascist political imagery was tailored to the hopes, dreams, and desires of each strata of the population. And he's very good at going, like, if we don't speak to the imagination, if we don't speak to desires and dreams and hope, our opponents will. And they will do it very successfully. And this is why there's a great quote from Bloch that history is an arsenal. History is not like an archive, Bloch says. History is a weapon, right? The idea of and this is completely in the tradition of Marx, of the 18th Brumaire. Like, we take on the symbols and gestures of struggles in the past, right? And we recuperate them and reinforce them for the present. Is there a simple answer? No. But the value of a philosophy of hope is actually to say that dreams and desires have a political valence to them. And if you are not prepared to articulate how a leftist politics can speak to it, your opponents will, and they'll do it very successfully, and they will do it very successfully until they send people off to die.
Thank you, John, for inaugurating our series of Culture of the Future talks in partnership with Zer0 Utopia. Our next talk will be next week, so we're going to have one talk per week throughout the month of April. The next talk will be on Thursday with Anthony Galuzzo, and it will be about Zardoz and degrowth and decelerationism. And we have two more talks on Wednesdays of the following weeks. There you go. They're all at 5 p.m. Lisbon time. Please join us. Please join me to thank John one last time. And John, I'll let you close the session and plug your new publications if you want. So thank you so much, Jon.
Yeah,
And
thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for the very thoughtful questions. I think the resurgence of utopian philosophy is both necessary and kind of welcome, and to talk of how dark our situation is also to demand a world of light. Yes, a primer on utopian philosophy, an introduction to the work of Ernst Bloch, it's out now with Zer0 Books. On July the 9th, Repeater Books will be publishing Capitalism, a Horror Story, Gothic Marxism and the Dark Side of the Radical Imagination. Yeah, thank you so much. Please do say hi on social media. I'm at the Lit Crit Guy on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you want to find me. And yeah, thank you again to Manuel and to the entire team for organizing this.